Good afternoon. How's everybody doing? Great to be learning with you on a Friday, Yom Shishi. Let's light up the darkness. Who's in the house on a Friday? Yehud in South Carolina, Gordo in Scotland, Renee in Indiana, Joe in the Inland Empire, Belle in Texas, Nancy in North Carolina, Ella in Southern California. Welcome, everybody. Short daf today. We're doing page 69 here in Tractate Avoda Zara. Continuing our discussion in chapter 5, today opening Mishnah number 3. I actually had I wouldn't call it a conversation, but I consulted with ChatGPT prior to today's daf, or teaching it, because as we're going to see, there's this sense, and we've seen it quite a few times already in this tractate, again, the stringency with regard to the wine of Gentiles, because basically all Gentiles, or the vast majority of Gentiles in this period, were idolaters. Probably their most common practice for committing idolatry was pouring out a bit of wine to their deity. And so, any chance they got, they might do that. And so one concern, if we're going to, leave our wine in the presence or in the keeping of Gentiles, is that they might come to pour some of our wine out for that deity as a libation, and that would render the wine prohibited under this very stringent view of any wine that even was in the possession of a Gentile, even if we're not sure whether he used it for idolatry or not. And certainly if we know that it was used for idolatry, the wine would be prohibited both for consumption and for benefit. But even this sense of, as we're going to see, did the Gentile have cause to believe that the Jew might come back at any moment, right? In other words, if you have a watchman doing nightly rounds, a security guard who's going to make his rounds at a building that he's guarding, you don't want him walking a regular beat, right, where it would be predictable. And so the thieves could time when he comes by. If he comes at the same time every evening and he's not going to come back around for another hour, then they know they can break in, get away with it. But if there's a randomization of when he makes his rounds, it's considered more secure. And likewise, we've already seen in this tractate this idea that if the Gentile is unsure when the Jew is going to come back, it's going to render the wine that's in his keeping or under his supervision or accessible to the Gentile, it's going to be more secure if he's not sure when the Jew is going to come back around. And so that led me to ask, to what extent are the sages protecting against, what aspect of the potential idolatry that's going to be performed with our wine are the sages protecting against? Is it just that the idolater will take the opportunity to pour out some wine for his deity any chance he gets, and we want to make sure he doesn't get a chance to do that? Is it that we're going to be truly suspicious that he knows, the Gentile knows, that if he does that to our wine, it's going to render our wine prohibited to us, and that he might do it maliciously? Or is it more a policy consideration that once we've established that the idolaters, the Gentiles, generally speaking in this era, all idolaters, once we've established that we want to keep a distance from them, we don't want assimilation, we don't want intermarriage, we don't want to risk that our wine might be used in their idolatrous libations, we don't want to risk that our people, our young and impressionable people, will be drawn after idolatry by coming to associate with the idolaters, who after all are having a lot of fun, their religion, which included all kinds of stuff like cultic sex, and a lot of drinking, right? Some of the libation was poured out to the idol. A lot more of it was drunk by the idolaters in their celebrations. So to what extent is there a mix of these motivations? And it was interesting, because it's hard to believe that we're going to be so suspicious that there's idolaters out there kind of like lurking around corners, just looking to get into a Jew's wine. And ChatGPT said it's not so much that. There's a lot of nuance to this, but the more general concern is that, and I'm glad, I was glad that ChatGPT confirmed my understanding of this. This is the way I was understanding it too, is that once you've established we need a separation, then you have to guard the separation, right? It's not so much we're suspicious of them coming to touch our wine. It's that we've said they can't touch our wine. We can't benefit from wine that they have touched, that is in their possession, etc. So we just have to guard against them coming into contact with it. There might be nothing malicious about it, but since we've decreed, or the sages have decreed, that we have to keep a fence kind of around our community, especially around wine, because wine gets used so often in this idolatrous fashion by the Gentiles. So we have to maintain that social boundary. That's what it was really all about. It was a protection of the community, of the Jewish norms, the Torah life that we're building as a community. And once you're saying that there is a boundary and we want to maintain the boundary, well then what does it take to maintain the boundary? So let's keep that in mind as we read today's Mishnah, number 3 in chapter 5. With regard to a Gentile who was transporting barrels of wine from one place to another place, together with a Jew. So if the wine was under the presumption of being supervised, it is permitted. But if the Jew notified him that he was going far away, then the wine is forbidden if the Jew left for a sufficient amount of time for the Gentile to bore a hole in the barrel, seal it again with plaster, and for the plaster to dry. Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel says the wine is forbidden only if it was sufficient time for the Gentile to open the barrel by removing the stopper altogether, stop it again by making a new stopper, and for the new stopper to dry. Is it because he's doing it maliciously, or is it that he just has access to the wine? He's got an opportunity maybe to drink some wine, pour out some for his deity, and he might seize that opportunity just as a matter of his religious preference. And we want to make sure that we've distanced ourselves and protected ourselves from him committing that action. With regard to one who placed his wine in a wagon or on a ship with a Gentile and went on his way by a shortcut, such that the Gentile does not know when the Jew will encounter him, even if the Jew entered the city and bathed, the wine is permitted because the Gentile would not use the wine for a libation for fear the owner might catch him doing it. If the Jew informed the Gentile that he was going away for a long period of time, the wine is forbidden. If it was for sufficient time for the Gentile to bore a hole in the barrel, seal it again with plaster, and for the plaster to dry, and Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel says it is forbidden only if it was sufficient time for him to open the barrel by removing the stopper altogether, stop it again, and for the new stopper to dry. With regard to one who left a Gentile in his shop, even if the Jew went out and came in and was not there all the time, the wine is permitted. But if the Jew informed the Gentile that he was going away for a long period of time, then the wine is forbidden. If it was sufficient time for the Gentile to bore a hole in the barrel, seal it again with plaster, and for the plaster to dry. And again, Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel says the wine is forbidden only if it was sufficient time for him to open the barrel, stop it again, and for the new stopper to dry. If a Jew was eating with a Gentile at the table and left jugs of wine on the table, and a jug on the side table, and he left it, and the Jew left it and went out. So what is on the table is forbidden, as it is likely that the Gentile handled it. Not even necessarily drank from it, but he handled it. Whereas what is on the side table is permitted, because it is unlikely that the Gentile handled that wine now that he has wine on the table right in front of him. But if the Jew said to the Gentile, mix water with the wine and drink, even the jug that is on the side table is forbidden. And similarly, open barrels are forbidden, but sealed barrels are permitted unless the Jew is out of the room for sufficient time for the Gentile to open the barrel by removing the stopper and stop it again by making a new stopper, and for the new stopper to dry. That's Mishnah number 5. Now the Gemara. What are the circumstances described by the phrase under the presumption of being supervised, right? This idea that even if he's not actually being supervised, the Gentile thinks that the wine is being supervised and therefore he won't come to touch it, which would leave the wine permitted for Jews to consume. The Gemara explains, it is as it is taught in a Baraisa. If one's donkey drivers and laborers were unreliable with regard to ritual purity, that's Amei Haaretz, right? People that just don't know much of the law, and therefore we can't rely on them to execute the Torah law properly. So these are Jews who are ignorant of Torah law. And they were laden with wine or produce that was ritually pure, and he had instructed them not to tamper with it, but he does not know whether or not they heeded him. So even if he went away from them to a distance of more than a mil, which is comparable to a mile, his pure items are still pure, as it may be presumed that they heeded his instructions. But if he said to them, "Go and I will come after you," so that they knew he would not be going with them, then once they are out of his sight, his pure items are rendered legally impure. We're not sure that these Amei Haaretz, right, these ignorant Jews, would have handled stuff that they were not supposed to handle in a manner that would render it impure. Since we're not sure, now that they're out of his sight, we have to be, it's possible to probable enough that we were going to render those materials impure. Now, again, it's stuff that is tameh, that is ritually impure. A Jew can consume it, but a priest cannot if it's teruma, which is a tithe set aside that only priests can consume, where both the teruma and the priest have to be in a state of ritual purity, tahara. Now, the Gemara asks, what is different in the first clause, where the produce is pure, and what is different in the latter clause, where it is impure? So Rav Yitzchak says, the ruling of the first clause is stated with regard to a case where he purified his donkey drivers and laborers for this assignment by having them immerse, so that they would not transfer impurity to the produce. You can't be sure, like they don't know enough to know whether they're tameh or tahor, whether they're ritually pure or impure. But if you, as a condition to hiring, and say you have to immerse in the mikvah and wait till nightfall, then, unless there's a reason to believe that they are impure with a very strong impurity, like contact with a corpse, but if it's a minor impurity, like contact, I guess, with the sherets, dead creeping thing, then this immersion will ensure that at the outset of their employment, they are ritually pure. And then you're going to tell them what to do so they don't become impure. And if they have a presumption of being supervised, then we can assume that they remained pure, right? So now we're going to learn from that via comparison, learn out from that via comparison to the case of leaving wine among Gentiles and whether there is this presumption of supervision or not. The Gemara now raises a difficulty. If that is so, in the latter clause, this should also apply. And the Gemara answers, an Am Haaretz, right, an ignorant Jew, is not punctilious about contact with another person. Although they themselves were purified, they may have met another Am Haaretz on the way, and the produce would be rendered impure by him. So the Gemara further objects, well, if so, then let us say so even in the first clause. The produce should be impure in that case as well. And Rava says it is a case where he came to them in a roundabout way, such that they would not know from where he might appear, the employer, right, who cares about Tuma and Tahara, such that they would not know from where he might appear, and they would be afraid to tamper with the goods because he might catch them in the act. So the Gemara objects, if that is so, this can apply to the latter clause also. And the Gemara answers, in the case of the latter clause, since he said to them, go and I will come after you, their minds are at ease that he will not surprise them. New subject. Our Mishnah teaches similar cases, right? They all sounded pretty similar, where we're leaving the Gentile in some form of, alone with barrels of wine. And the question seems to be, how long were they alone with the barrels or in a state of feeling that they're not supervised? And is it long enough for them to open the wine, which was sealed in some kind of a manner, and for them to recreate a seal that would pass inspection? so to speak, so that they feel they could get away with drinking some of that wine, making a libation with it, and restoring it to the way it appeared before. Right, so the Mishnah taught similar cases, including the case of one who left a Gentile in his shop, and the case of one who placed his wine in a wagon or on a ship. So the Gemara explains, and it is necessary for the Mishnah to cite all these different cases, even though they appear very similar, as had the Mishnah taught only the case of the Gentile transporting a Jew's barrels, one might assume that the reason there is no concern that the Gentile used the wine in that case is because he thinks that perhaps the owner will come and see him. But in a wagon or on a ship, one might say that he can take his ship far off and do what he desires in such a way that the owner cannot see him. And if the Mishnah taught only the case where the Jew placed his wine in a wagon or on a ship, one might assume that the concern there is because the Gentile thinks perhaps he will come on a different road or stand on the bank of the river and see me. But in the case of a Gentile in his shop, one might say that he can hold the door closed and do whatever he desires with no concern of being seen. Therefore, the Mishnah teaches us that in all these cases, the same ruling applies, and there is no concern unless the Jew informed the Gentile that he was going a great distance away, and so the Gentile had cause to believe that he would be alone and unsupervised and remain unsupervised for long enough to tamper with the wine and restore its seals and thus get away with it. There is a dispute in the Mishnah with regard to the length of time that causes the wine to be rendered forbidden if the owner notified the Gentile that he's going off some distance. So Rabbi Bar Chana says that Rabbi Yochanan says the dispute is only with regard to the case of a stopper made of lime plaster, in which a hole can be sealed without being detected. But with regard to the case of a stopper made of clay, in which a patch would be detected, everyone agrees that the wine is forbidden only if there was enough time for the Gentile to open the barrel by removing the stopper entirely, stop it again with a new stopper, and for the new stopper to dry. The Gemara raised an objection to this explanation of the dispute from a Baraisa. Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel said to the rabbis, but isn't the sealing of the hole noticeable, both from above and from below, and therefore the Gentile will be wary of doing so? And the Gemara explains the objection. So granted, if you say that the dispute is also with regard to a stopper made of clay, this explanation is consistent with that which the Baraisa teaches us as the response, or as to the response of Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel, meaning its sealing is noticeable both from above and below. But if you say that the dispute is with regard to a stopper made of lime plaster, where it's not noticeable, right, if there's a patch, so granted, the location of the sealing is noticeable from below, as it is possible to fill the entire hole with lime plaster, and then empty space remains below, but the resealing is not noticeable from above. So the Gemara answers, it was Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel who did not know what the rabbis were saying, and this is what he is saying to them. If you are speaking of a stopper made of clay, its sealing is noticeable from both above and below. And if you are speaking of a stopper made of lime plaster, granted, it's not noticeable from above, but it is noticeable in any event from below. And how would the rabbis respond to this claim? They maintain that since it is not noticeable from above that there is a patch, it does not occur to the Gentile that the former will turn the stopper over and see the patch. Alternatively, the rabbis could answer that sometimes it seals firmly and it is not detectable. Rava says that the law is in accordance with the opinion of Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel, since we learned an unattributed Mishnah in accordance with his opinion. This is as we learned in the last clause of the Mishnah. If a Jew was eating with a Gentile at the table, and he left jugs of wine on the table and a jug on the side table, and he left it and went out, so what is on the table is forbidden, as it is likely that the Gentile handled it, whereas what is on the side table is permitted. But if the Jew said to the Gentile, mix water with the wine and drink, then even that jug that is on the side table is forbidden. And similarly, open barrels are forbidden, but sealed barrels are permitted unless the Jew was out of the room for sufficient time for the Gentile to open the barrel by removing the stopper, stop it again by making a new stopper, and for the new stopper to dry. So the Gemara asks, isn't that obvious? This ruling is stated explicitly in the Mishnah. So the Gemara answers, lest you say that Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel teaches the entire clause, and this is the continuation of his previous statement, and not an unattributed statement of the Mishnah. Rava teaches us that this is not so. I'm almost done. Questions or comments, please get them in now. The Gemara asks, and since we maintain that the law is in accordance with the opinion of Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel, who is not concerned about a bored hole in the barrel, and even though there is a concern that the Gentile may have opened and replaced the stopper, the law is in accordance with the opinion of Rabbi Eliezer, who is not concerned with forgery of the seal because excessive effort is required to forge a seal. Therefore, nowadays, what is the reason that we do not place wine in sealed barrels, even in sealed barrels in the possession of Gentiles? And the Gemara answers, it is because of the bunghole, the hole in a barrel through which one smells the wine, which a Gentile might widen a bit to drink from it. Again, taking into account the kinds of practices that were commonly used with regard to, wine and barrels and jugs in commercial settings. And finally, Rava, a new subject, just to finish up. Rava says, in the case of a Gentile prostitute, where Jews are dining at her table, the wine at the table is permitted. Granted, their passion for the sin of harlotry overwhelms their judgment. Otherwise, what are they doing having dinner with a Gentile prostitute? But the passion for wine used for a libation does not overwhelm their judgment, and they will not allow her to use it for a libation. In the case of a Jewish prostitute and Gentiles dining with her, the wine is forbidden. And what is the reason? It is that since she is contemptible in their eyes, she is subjugated to them, and they use the wine for a libation without consideration for her. They don't care so much about the feelings and religious inclinations of the prostitute that they are frequenting. It's very interesting. Again, we've seen this before, that definitely the sages do not approve or have much respect for prostitutes, whether Jewish or Gentile. But that doesn't mean that they assume that somebody who commits one sin commits other sins. It has to be taken into consideration, but it's not automatic. So that's what we've got for today. And I just see a couple of comments. Camille, like the Shomrim, the guards, for our departed, our Shomrim for genetic matter before medical procedures. Thanks for the drash, Shabbat Shalom. Right, so she's talking a little bit about how, the concern that the Gentile will come to touch the wine if he feels that he's unsupervised. And this idea of supervision comes up in other contexts. One is a little different, right? A shomer for a departed person. So this is somebody who's going to usually stay up overnight reciting Tehillim, Psalms, after a person has died and before they're buried the next day. And I need to, learn a little bit more about that. I just don't remember offhand all of the different considerations and motivations for that practice, which is still practiced today, right? One is the idea that the soul is still, very much near the body and in pain, because the soul is not totally free to go to the next world until the body is buried. And so having somebody there and reciting Psalms is a comfort to this person who just died. But it's also called a shomer, right? So what are they guarding? I mean, one idea is there's a body there, right? So we're guarding that other Jews don't come into contact with the body, and then they would get tumas mace, the very strong kind of tuma, religious ritual impurity, which would require immersing in a mikvah on the 3rd and 7th days, the purification process, and being sprinkled with the waters of purification before they could finally enter the holy temple. It's a difficult purification process, a challenging one, and we certainly want to keep people from coming to need that unnecessarily. But I don't think that's really why we call that person a shomer. And then this other idea of shomering for genetic matter before medical procedures. I'm not so familiar with that. I'd have to learn more about that. And then these days, we're not talking so much about guarding against, that they might come to use our wine as a libation. These days, we're more concerned that we need shomrim, to protect us from violent attack, right? That's these days, like the shomrim, that, those are organizations that are guarding Jewish communities from violence, and we had a long period where we weren't so worried about that. We're back to being very concerned about that. We have to take that very seriously. And in that context, there is suspicion, right? I mean, I'm a member of a security organization, Magen Am, and we get intel reports all the time, and so when we see that somebody who's not from our community is outside of a synagogue, especially the kind of small Orthodox, often unmarked synagogues, not, architectural, impressive buildings that would attract, people to just take photographs of them for artistic purposes. But if there's somebody out there taking video or pictures, of what's otherwise a pretty nondescript Jewish building, a house of worship or a school, we get very concerned. There just have been a lot of attacks and terrorist activity, and we have to take that very, very seriously, and as a community be quite vigilant. It's not really what we're talking about here, but it's interesting parallels. That's what I've got for us today, and with God's help, we'll be together again tomorrow after Shabbos. Now it's every week a few minutes earlier. So I'll aim to try to get on the air by 9:20 tomorrow. Very interesting Torah portion this week that we've been reading all week, and we'll read aloud in synagogue tomorrow morning. Parshas Re'eh, a lot of laws in it that relevant to topics we've been covering recently, including the laws of which animals are kosher and which are not, and tithing, among other subjects, and Avoda Zara, of course. But also, this is Shabbos Mevarchim. So we'll be blessing on this Shabbos the Rosh Chodesh, which is coming next week for Elul. We're going to be beginning Elul. That's a very beautiful and important month of the year, the final month of the Hebrew year, when we take stock, make an accounting of ourselves and our practices, what we've done over the last year, what we hope to accomplish in the year to come. And I think I mentioned this before, but it's such a beautiful teaching from Rabbi David Weinberg, that as we make that spiritual accounting, let us begin with what we did right in the past year, because we did a lot of things right, and we want to make sure that we learn from that, and we're able to build on that success and establish a firm foundation, and then see where we went wrong and why we went wrong and how we'll make correction in the year to come. But very often people get, if they're doing this kind of accounting, they're so focused on what they did wrong, they can get depressed and discouraged and end up not really doing a careful accounting of what they did right. So maybe this year, let's begin our accounting with what we did right. All the best. Good Shabbos. May it be a sweet Shabbos. May we go into it hearing only good news, hear good news only during Shabbos, and emerge from it hearing only good news. Good Shabbos.